Hey man, how are you?
How you doing, buddy?
Good to see you face to face, man.
Yes, sir.
How you feeling?
I'm good, man. I've just had a crazy week.
Oh
Things
yeah, me too, bro. Me too.
I can imagine. I've been seeing you doing like the virtual book tour.
Yeah. That's going pretty well, man. I'm doing two or three events every evening, which is which on paper looks like one thing, but it's hard, man. It's a grind.
I can
And
imagine.
I mean, we had planned on before the pandemic, we had planned on having a tour all over the country. That's a real grind. And so this is not nearly as hard as it would have been to be actually going to all of those cities.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, say I appreciate you tapping in, man. I've been a big
Yeah.
fan, and I'm a big Bernie guy too. So
Yeah. I miss Bernie's man. I take every I take every loss like super personally, not because of like wins and losses, but I know the people that I'm fighting for actually are fighting for everyday people. And I know that when Bernie loses or when somebody else that I'm fighting for loses, people suffer as a result of that. And so he, to me, if you went into a lab and made a candidate designed for a pandemic, Bernie would come out of that. Like he was made for this moment. Like I so desperately wish he was president, man. And
yeah,
I think he would have mopped the floor with Trump, man.
yeah, it's interesting. I guess we'll just dive right into it because like
Yeah.
I'm very passionate about Bernie, and when he lost in 2016, and there was that moment at the convention where his brother was crying. That shit
Oh yeah. Oh,
killed
it
me,
got
man.
me. Well, his brother loves him, man, and what people, I worked with Bernie on this for this campaign.
Yeah,
Bernie was deeply hesitant to tell his own origin story. And what his brother knew in that moment was, man, they grew up rough, man. Like his family narrowly escaped the Holocaust. Most of Bernie's family died in the Holocaust, and they grew up dirt poor in the middle of Brooklyn in a
right.
community of really of Holocaust survivors. And they both of his parents, his mother and his father, died when he was in college. And it it changed Bernie in a huge way, man. And when his parents died is when he threw himself into the civil rights movement. And his brother knows all of that better than me or you or anybody. And so to see him, his brother was deeply touched. It was a special moment for Bernie, who doesn't show a lot of his emotions on his
He
sleeve.
doesn't. You're right. He
Yeah,
doesn't. Yeah,
yeah,
and to see him do that, it was deep, man. I'm
yeah,
curious. Like, obviously, we are in a weird situation. You and I, as people who rode very hard for Bernie Sanders and the ideals that he stood up for, and obviously it was very frustrating. Um, two times in a row to kind of see the DNC uh it seemed like they really worked against him.
yeah,
Um, you
yeah.
know,
Bernie Bernie wrote the foreword to my book, and when he wrote it, he was still running.
Make
And
Change, which is out right now.
yeah, and
Yes.
he says something in his foreword, and he was thinking about something else when he said this. But what we have to come to understand is, as much as the Democratic establishment two different times conspired against Bernie, it's on us to make a survey of who is for us and who is against us, and we have to outmaneuver and outsmart and outorganize them. And in a lot of ways, in retrospect, after Bernie was crushing it in the primaries,
Killing it.
basically,
And then
yeah,
South Carolina happened, and
yeah. Well, it was not, he lost South Carolina, but literally 2 days before that, Bernie won Nevada in a
no,
landslide.
I remember that. Yeah, it was a
And
caucus state. That was a caucus state, right?
it was a caucus
Yeah.
state, but then, Bernie won California. And typically, the candidate that wins California wins the nomination. And having won and competed in all of the places, Bernie was always in first or second.
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party basically said, listen, we need all of you to drop out. we need all of you to get behind Joe Biden, and we like need you to do it tomorrow. And so you saw Amy Klobuchar, Mayor
Everybody.
Pete, Beto, and others all said, okay. And it was too much to overcome. But here's what Bernie talks about in his forward, man, is that instead of focusing on how they walloped us,
Mm-hmm.
in the future, we have to think, how might something like that happen? And how could we outflank and outmaneuver? How could we out-organize something like that? And in a way, I don't think this is on Bernie, but I think that move kind of caught the campaign flat-footed. And you know, it's the media, it's a lot of things, but at the end of the day, it's on us, man. If you know, if you lose an election, it's on you. You lost. And I just now, in retrospect, there are 20 things I wish we had done differently to help his campaign.
Yeah, I just hope that, you know, he sparks the next great, you know, politician, because his ideas obviously are and just his authenticity
Yeah.
and his, you know, like you said, if you were to just go into the lab and find like a presidential candidate that would fit what's going on right now, but just in general, just like somebody who is really a unicorn in the sense that like they've never really switched up on what they believe in.
Nah,
And
man, you can cut and paste that dude from any generation, and he's Bernie. He's fighting for universal health care. He's fighting for poor and marginalized people.
yeah,
He's fighting for equality and access, and he's fighting against war. And you can see him doing it in every generation, relentlessly, no matter what it cost him. You can see him calling out, you know, wealthy special interest,
hmm,
and it can be a speech from 1979 or 2009. And it's not that it's repetitive. Each time he's saying it with passion,
yeah,
zeal. He means it every time. But I think there's a lot to learn from that. I think a lot of up and coming politicians and leaders that he loves, like he loves AOC. He loves Cory Bush and Jamal Bowman, who just won their primaries in Missouri and New York.
yep.
He loves Pramila Jayapal, rather, in Seattle, and a lot of others. There's some people coming up who are, you know, he loves the squad, and they were all members who supported him, and so there's some people coming up that I think have that level of authenticity and courage. Um, you know, he'll continue. I think he's the type of person that will continue leading on the issues, and I think he'll be around, you know, still for maybe even another generation. Basically, I think he's
Listen,
gonna be around
Shaun,
for
what we
a long
need is you and Killer Mike to run for office somewhere.
time. Yeah, right, right. You know, I think Killer Mike could. Killer Mike and I. Killer Mike is born and raised in Atlanta, and I lived in Atlanta for almost 20 years. Somebody like him could run for Congress or mayor
He
in
knows. He
Atlanta.
knows that it's got to happen. I've talked to him in depthly about it, and he knows that
Yeah, no, I
he's
think he
not
could.
ready yet, but
Yeah,
it's good.
I
It's
feel the same way. I think there are a lot of things that he and I both would have to change about the businesses that we run,
mhm.
the tours that we do, the way that our lives go. When you are a serious elected official, most of that has to come to a complete stop. And I have so many other responsibilities. For me, I tell people all the time, like, I would love to run for something local, even in New York, like a city council position. What happens is people put on Mike or me or others that, like, you should run for mayor or president, and there's a place for that. But
It's not
I would
off the
love
rip
to.
is not the place. You got to start off. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so I tell people, it's like, no, like, I actually, if I'm gonna do something, I want to do it well.
I got to get
Uh,
my feet wet first.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that shows respect for the position and the office, and I don't see that in my future anytime soon. And I think Mike is probably still a ways away from it, but
Mhm.
he and I both are always trying to figure out how can we lead with the influence and position that we have now.
Well, look, we got Shaun King. It's the Bootleg Kev podcast. We haven't even done an official introduction. We went on a Bernie tangent right
Yes,
away.
sorry, man.
That's my guy, man. Make Change. The book is out. While we're talking politics, I was very, very annoyed for you over this past few days.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's funny because, like you said, like I feel like once every 5 or 6 weeks you trend on Twitter.
Yeah,
And for me, it was frustrating because people were putting a tweet that you had up I don't know, during the primaries up
it was
against.
even before the primaries. I wrote a tweet in 2018 before the Democratic primaries even started, before Bernie had even announced, and I hadn't actually endorsed Bernie yet. And sincerely, I was open to endorsing someone other than Bernie. And I said that to Bernie and others, that I wanted to see who all was going to run. And I just said, I know two candidates that I won't be endorsing for the Democratic nomination, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, because of their role in in helping build mass incarceration. It wasn't that I would never support them in life or never support their policies, but I knew
endorse them as the
they weren't, and not even. I wasn't even talking about for president. It was the tweet was actually in a tweet thread. People removed.
Well, I was going to say the one tweet that they tried to use against you from this week was like the last tweet of like 4 or 5.
Yeah, I wrote. So that's what they do. So I wrote a tweet thread that was also still very critical of
100%.
Kamala. And just to, like, I have a friend, Jamal Truelove, and Jamal was wrongly convicted of murder in San Francisco, a murder he didn't commit, spent 8 years in prison, and he was convicted by Kamala Harris. It ruined his life.
Wow.
And the city of San Francisco had to pay $10 million in that wrongful conviction suit, and it changed Jamal in immeasurable ways. So, like, as district attorney, she was deeply problematic. All I wanted people to say, and then people start saying stupid stuff like, is Shaun paid by the DNC? I was never paid by Bernie. I never worked for Bernie. It was always a volunteer. I've never been paid by a politician a day in my life. And I've studied Kamala's record. I have no desire to be buddies or friends with her or with her campaign. She's gotten significantly better. And she's improved on issues like she now stands against qualified immunity for police. She's one of the few senators who does so. She now stands for the full decriminalization and legalization of marijuana, which Joe Biden doesn't. Yeah. And she was a co-sponsor of a bill with Cory Booker, which was probably the best bill ever on expunging people's records who were ever convicted in the war on drugs. And she was a co-sponsor of that bill. And so, listen, I know that she and Joe Biden, they're not my dream come true. They neither were in my top 10. And yet,
Joe.
Yeah, especially Joe. and because here's the thing, I can't say for Joe what I can say for Kamala. She has evolved and improved. And if people don't want to give her credit for that, that's more says something about them. Mm-hmm. But Joe hasn't. And Joe basically still won't acknowledge his role in building mass incarceration. He still won't stand for the most basic policies that are actually popular among Democrats, including universal health care, including basic criminal justice reform policies. And it's not because of his age. I don't accept that. It's him. I saw Bernie.
He lacks a lot of humility. Joe Biden doesn't have a lot of humility.
Oh, he doesn't, man. And he couches it in some other things, but no, he's he's always been that way. And I also gave, probably for the first time in 2 years, I gave Joe Biden a compliment in that tweet thread to say that I was surprised that he picked Kamala because she was the only person that ran against him that walloped him several times.
She went in on him during the I watched every debate, and she really held him over the fire.
Bernie, it's not his style to hit people like that.
Right.
And all of us who were in his corner wanted him to throw knockout punches against everybody. And he's just a good guy. And Kamala was a former prosecutor, what we were just talking about. and she hammered Joe Biden on the crime bill. She hammered him on his role of between integration and segregation. And they were probably two of the low moments for Joe Biden in the whole debate. And so I said I thought it took some level of guts for him to pick the candidate who hammered him the hardest.
One
And
could argue too. Remember, I mean, there was a point in time during the primary where it seemed like he was done. There was no money coming in, and
oh, dude,
uh,
he was toast.
I mean, South Carolina saved his ass, you know.
Oh man, and,
And
and I have some beef with how that happened. You almost aren't allowed to criticize how South Carolina saved him because it seems anti-black or racist, and sometimes it can venture into that.
right,
I just think that like Bernie won Nevada with a huge majority of the Latino vote in the same way that Joe won South Carolina, except Bernie got no credit for it. And I felt like both win. I thought the win in South Carolina mattered. I'm not saying it doesn't. I don't think it settled the campaign. The guy was dead in the water, and he literally never even campaigned in I think 44 states.
he didn't have any
And
money. Like for a
no,
while there, he just didn't have money.
no man, I swear he probably was doing like budget rental cars, man. Like they were struggling.
Yeah,
And I did a an interview with Michael Moore recently, and I've thought about the campaign a lot. I think in retrospect, Joe Biden was clearly more formidable than we gave him credit for. His role as Barack Obama's vice president is deeply meaningful, and
and
we
underestimated, I'm sure, at the time.
yeah, it was. And for even in my own house, like my in most black households, there's I'm looking at my screen here. There's God here.
Right,
There's Michelle Obama as a little less than God, and Barack is just a little less than Michelle. And then
right.
there's everybody else. And for most black voters, particularly black voters over 40, the fact that Joe Biden faithfully served as Barack's wingman for 8 years,
8 years.
dude, it mattered to them, man. And I just think we didn't give that enough credit. I think Bernie struggled in the South in 2016, but in this time, we actually fought hard in South Carolina. What I didn't understand was once we're kind of wonky right now, but once Congressman Clyburn endorsed Biden,
Mm-hmm.
South Carolina was pretty much over. And what I didn't know, I don't live in South Carolina. I didn't know he had juice like that. I knew he had a lot of influence. Exit polls showed that 60% of voters chose their candidate in the final 2 or 3 days, which is when he endorsed
Which is
Joe
when he
Biden.
endorsed him. Yeah,
And so, Clyburn had everything to do with that. I don't think it's dirty. I don't think it's like, listen, that's Clyburn used his juice. And we have to think like that and figure out how do we win and what are the paths to victory, and I'm not sour grapes over it at all. I'm proud of how we did I campaigned hard in California. I did nearly 50 events up and down California. Bernie won there. I campaigned in New Hampshire, and and we won there. So, um, and Bernie never sold out, and I wish there was still this enthusiasm. I have two daughters who are 18 and 20, and this is the first presidential election they get to vote in. And Joe Biden was pretty much the least liked candidate among young people for all the candidates.
yeah.
So young people are having to learn. How old are you, man?
I'm 33.
So I'm 40, and the older you get, sometimes you vote for people you just half like. And that's how politics can be. You don't always get to vote for somebody that just blows you away.
Right.
You don't even always get to vote for people you love. Sometimes you have to be super practical about it and say, this guy, Donald Trump, is a monster and he has to be defeated. And even though I'm not enthusiastic about Joe Biden and have all of these criticisms, for me this year, I'm really voting to defeat Donald Trump.
Yeah,
And
I do think that that is kind of the weird, because I've been super critical of Joe Biden on social media, especially during the primaries. And I feel like that is the position that people like you and I are in, that have platforms that people, for whatever reason, obviously yours is a lot bigger than mine, but people like look to us for whatever reason. It's kind of a weird, situation to be in, because it's like, hey, had maybe this not been Donald Trump that Joe Biden was running against, like maybe you might write in a third party candidate or something. But now is the time
no, I don't.
where
Yeah, I agree.
where guess what? Another 4 years of Trump might just the world might be gone as we know it. You know what I'm saying?
And
Like,
here's the thing, man. You and I have a certain level of success and privilege and security, but Donald Trump is a dire threat to very particular communities in this country, and we owe it. We owe it to immigrants in this country. We owe it to Muslims in this country and to many other communities to make sure that he doesn't have another day in office. Even his gross mismanagement of, particularly his gross mismanagement of the pandemic, I think will go down in presidential history as one of the greatest failures in
presidents
American leadership. Yeah,
ever,
man.
if not the greatest, it's one of them.
Well, here's the thing, we are celebrating now in other countries that have gone 100 days without a single case, and our country just crossed 5 million.
No, I saw
And
you post the rankings of all the countries, and it's crazy.
no,
5 million.
when you look at the countries that are growing in the pandemic, it's all developing countries and the United States. And now we don't like to think of ourselves as a developing nation, but we have to ask ourselves, why are we not only on this list, but we're leading the list?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think the United States, it even gets to our healthcare systems. It gets into racism and discrimination and how inequity is built into our nation. There's a reason why we're failing, and almost every other developed nation in the world has already flattened the curve. They're already past it. And there's almost no, I don't see any end in sight for us right now.
Yeah, it's rough, man. I wanted to talk to you because I feel like you've kind of become one of the leaders in this country, kind of by default, when it comes to just spreading awareness to what's going on. Like, and you've I mean, I've been following you probably for 5 or 6 years now, and
I appreciate it. Yeah.
you know, I feel like what you do is that's why I get so irked when I see people trying to come at you. I'm like, like this
Well,
guy's
see,
like,
because you've been around, you see more context, and you also see kind of the manipulation of how people will extract one quote and extract words from another quote and say, "Look at this guy, he's a hypocrite." And for me, I tell you what did it for me. I was the senior justice, right? I moved my whole family to New York. We moved to Brooklyn, and I was the senior justice writer for the New York Daily News, and I wrote hundreds and hundreds of articles for the paper, even articles that were on the front page, articles that were the most shared articles for the entire paper. And then I would walk around the streets of New York. This is before the pandemic, and people would come up to me, and they wouldn't tell me they read my articles. They would say something like this to me. They would say, "Shaun, everything I know about the news, I get from your Instagram." And at first, when people told me that, I freaked out a little bit because Instagram's not really built for that. It wasn't designed to be a news source, and I wasn't running my page to be a news source.
Mhm.
And so I continued to write my articles, continued to push forward as a journalist. And everywhere I would go, people would say, "Listen, if you don't post it on Instagram, I don't see it." And eventually, instead of rejecting that, I just leaned into it and said, for better or for worse, people are using this community and this source as how they learn about police brutality, about racism and bigotry. And I have to find smart, useful ways to curate this thing better, to be responsible for it. I'm still frustrated that we don't have better news sources for people to lean into where they can get current, up-to-date information on these types of issues. But in the absence of it, I just leaned into it and just said, okay, let me try to do better and share as many stories as I can. So that's me. I don't have any help. That's me, posting them, writing them. I don't have any special apps. I'm just on my phone, chugging along, trying to keep people as informed as I can. And
Also, just holding people accountable on your
yeah,
page. I think the fact that, like, I mean, look, as a white guy in America who has made his entire living as a grown up off of the back of Black culture, like, I've been involved in hip hop my entire life, and that's how I feed my family.
yeah.
I got a biracial son, and you know, like your page is really something that, like, me and my wife, or even my son who's 14, he follows you. It's like,
Well, see, I get that everywhere, man. Everywhere that changed me too. Like when someone like you tells me that you have a child who fought, everywhere I go, I get parents who say, "Hey, my kids turned me on to your page," or I get school teachers who tell me, elementary, middle school, high school teachers say, "We use your social media as a primary source for how we study these issues," and it just caused me to say, like, okay, this is social media was kind of designed for like laughs and giggles. It was designed for cat pictures. It was designed for for models and
lighthearted stuff. I mean, yeah, but
yeah,
at the same time, it's also, it's awareness.
yeah. And so I tried to lean into it, man. And so when somebody tells me, like, so I don't take that lightly. When people's children or students or teachers or professors are using this as a source, I put a lot of effort into it. And so I see, as weird as it is, and I never imagined it would be this way. Like I see the community that I have, particularly on Instagram, as being my primary way to inform the world of injustice. And I try not to just tell bad stories. I try to point us to solutions, actions
No,
that
for
we can
sure.
take.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's you use what you have, and I'm trying, man.
With the book Make Change, I do feel like there is a we got, like, and I feel like you do a good job of this with grassroots law. But it's easy to post something on Instagram, right? It's easy to spread stuff socially online. Um, but I don't think that's enough.
Oh
If
no,
you're
not at all.
truly, obviously it helps with spreading awareness, but, like, a perfect example, like, the Blackout Tuesday when everyone posted the black square, it's like, okay, like, everyone posted that, not necessarily just because it was the thing to do. Like, you look like an asshole if you didn't post the black square. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But what I'm curious, like, what would be advice you would give somebody who might just share stuff on social media, who doesn't necessarily, like, know how to really, put their money where their mouth is, and
Yeah.
or take further steps to try to make change? I know, you can
That's
write politicians, you can call, I know I
yeah.
called police departments and left
Yeah.
voicemails and sent emails, but, like, what is kind of just some bare bones
Oh
advice
no, I got
that
you.
you
That's
have?
why I wrote the book, Kev. When I've traveled now from the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement until right before the pandemic, I've traveled to 47 states. I've been to not just the 65 largest cities, but I've been into North and South Dakota. I've been deep into Alaska, into the Mississippi Delta, all over Texas and Florida, South Carolina, Alabama, and everywhere in between. And everywhere I would go, people would ask me one question. Some version of this question. They
Mhm.
would say, "Shaun, I'm frustrated about injustice or racism or bigotry or police brutality, but please tell me what I can actually do about it." They would always ask me some version of that. "Shaun, what decisions do I need to make? What actions do I need to take to actually change this thing?" And it was to answer that question that I wrote the book. I've answered that question in little sound bites and in little clips
Right.
to thousands of people. But in the book, I took 272 pages to say, actually, let me spell out for you how you can use your life to make a substantive, measurable difference. I'll say two things, man. One is that most of what we do fighting back against injustice builds awareness. But in this, and that's good, you have very little change without awareness. But this country, if it's taught me anything, it's that it's fully willing to be aware of its worst problems
And
and do
turn its head.
nothing about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and say, we see it,
It don't
we
affect me.
yeah. And it's not, and that's not just a Trump thing. That's
Oh, it's
Democrats and
America.
Republicans. Yeah, and it's not just police brutality and mass incarceration. It's school shootings.
Everything.
It's climate change. It's our horrible immigration system. We know these systems are failing. We are fully aware, but being aware is not enough. And my book starts after awareness. So let's assume you are
We're
aware.
all aware. What
Yeah.
now?
Here's the first decision that you have to make. And I literally spend a few chapters walking people through how to make this decision. You have to choose a cause. And until you say, listen, I'm going to fight on this issue, this very particular issue. Mine is police brutality and mass incarceration. That's the decision I made.
Mhm.
I'm here at my house now. My wife, she chose childhood literacy, and she's been fighting and working and hustling to teach children to read for nearly 20 years now. But whatever your issue is, you have to really plant your feet down and say, I'm literally not moving until I change this. Now, what I say to people is, it's not enough for you to be able to tell me, well, here's my issue.
Mhm.
Here's how I kind of prove whether or not you've actually chosen a cause. It's if I ask your friends and family, hey, do you know, does Kev have a cause that he's chosen? It's when I ask your neighbors, when I ask your coworkers and colleagues, when you've chosen a cause to devote your life to, everybody around you knows this. You won't leave them alone about it. You are constantly trying to recruit them to it.
Yep.
You'd be hard pressed to find a single person, not just in my family, but anybody who knows me who couldn't say, yeah, Shaun is the guy that fights back against police brutality. It's not just because I'm well known.
Yeah.
It's because I'm relentless with it. And the same is true for the most effective people in the world. And listen, the truth is, it's true for anybody who's effective at what they do, not just fighting for change. It's true for LeBron with sports and even getting into entertainment. It's true anybody who's chosen their thing, you know it. It's unmistakably clear.
You
And
know where those people stand, like almost to a point. That's how I am, like I'm around a lot of younger, I work in the music industry, so I own a recording studio, so I'm always around a lot of younger
yep.
people, and I'm always beating them over the head about shit, and it's like, I'm sure it annoys them at times,
Well, see, most people are frustrated. They're frustrated with the world. That's a start. But most people haven't made a choice. You know what? This is my thing. I'm fighting for the rights of girls and women. I'm fighting against climate change. Most people see problems and they're angered by them. They're aware of them. But change begins with making a hardcore decision. And when you make that decision, you start to see the world. It's almost as if when you own a car, you now see that model of that car everywhere.
Yeah.
When you make a decision to change the world in a very particular way, you then develop a new lens to see opportunities, to see how to solve that problem. What I have found, as basic as what I just said, is most people haven't made that decision.
Mhm.
And it's part of why we see a whole lot of awareness, but very little change. Not enough people have decided, okay, I fought for awareness, but now I'm dedicating my life to changing this issue. And it's a serious decision.
Yo, man, quick break in the podcast to tell you about our sponsor, Odd Socks. All right, make sure you go to oddsocksofficial.com, ODDSOX official.com. Use the keyword Bootleg Kev, and you'll save 20% when you check out. They got crazy licenses on socks. They got, man, listen, let's pull out these Ric Flair joints. All right, they got Ric Flair, WWE, Nickelodeon. How about some Chucky for Halloween coming up? Or just some basic joints. They got the Odd Socks Basics line. One more time, everything you need. Really, you need the most comfortable socks in the world on your feet. Go to oddsocksofficial.com and use the keyword Bootleg Kev at checkout, and you'll save 20% off. That's oddsocksofficial.com. Back to the podcast.
Issue I wanted to talk to you about, because I do feel like there is two factions of the defund the police conversation,
Sure.
right? I think that, my mom and my dad got into a huge argument. My parents are older white people. My mom's super hippie. She's really on her fuck the police shit, and my dad is a little less like, you're crazy, right? But I think that, I think that at least where I stand on it is I think San Francisco just started, like, you had posted about it. Again, getting a lot of my news from you.
Yeah. San Francisco just started it. Yeah, they just started a new
situations.
Yeah.
You don't need military, you don't need armed police to show up for certain situations. If a kid gets caught shoplifting a candy bar at a liquor store, there should not be a 3 cop cars to show up. And at least, where I grew up, I didn't grow up in great areas, so I know better than anything. No matter how small or insignificant the call is, it's always 3 cop cars that show up.
Yeah,
no matter what.
Yeah, Billy Badass, sometimes guns out, and they're gonna make an arrest. It's not gonna be pleasant, and it could literally be over a candy bar or a can of soda.
Or somebody just having a bad day at the bus stop, and someone drives by and sees, like, yo, this guy's acting crazy at the bus stop. But what I was gonna say was, I do think that it's important that we reform the police departments that we have, because there's so much bureaucracy involved, and it's less about doing the right thing and more about all of the bureaucracy that comes with a police department and the unions and all that. And I think that, at least where I stand on defund the police, is reallocate a lot of the sources in the same way that our military is overfunded, like
grossly so,
insanely, right?
Yeah,
like those
more than the next 10 countries combined.
Crazy, right?
And hundreds of billions of dollars are just wasted.
It's insane. And the same thing with our police departments. A lot of these police departments have equipment that they'll never use. You know what I mean? But I feel like I'm against just getting rid of the police, but I am for reallocating funds into the community from the police and reforming the idea of what police are.
Yeah, let me say something about it. First, your dad and most Americans are taught that police keep communities safe. And I've done studies on this, man. If you go to America's safest cities, if you go to America's safest neighborhoods, you can hardly find a police officer in any of them. They're safe. Where do you live right now?
I live in Burbank.
Yeah, if you go to the safest neighborhoods in all of Los Angeles, they're not swarming with police. You don't see police precincts. You don't see jails. They are safe because everybody there is employed. Everybody there has jobs, healthcare, education. Everybody there has resources. They are clean. They are well cared for. There's access to, there are no food deserts. There are wonderful grocery stores. There's no lack. The things that make America's safest neighborhoods and cities safe aren't more police. And that's widely known. If you literally go to the 10 safest areas of Los Angeles, you could hardly find the police. And so that's number one, that the safest communities in America, they're safe for very particular reasons. And what we're saying is we want to duplicate that safety, that kind of safety, in other communities. But secondly, and Los Angeles is probably the most important illustration here, Right now, the LAPD takes up over 50% of the general fund of all of Los Angeles. Over 50% of the budget.
That's
If you go to
crazy.
if you go to other mega cities around the country, it tends to be between 1 and 4%. In Los Angeles, it's 51%. It's so much, it's so bloated that there's then not funding for homelessness, there's not funding for substance abuse. And so what they do is in Los Angeles and other cities around the country, police are just expected to handle everything. It doesn't matter if it's substance abuse or homelessness. It doesn't matter if it's school truancy.
Mm-hmm.
In most cities now, police are even the office handling pet problems and missing cats and dogs. And it's like, listen, let's remove as much of this as from police as we can, number one. And then another study showed, and this blew my mind, even as somebody who studies policing, this was in the AP just recently, that in the average major police department in America, less than 1% of all of their time is spent on violent crime. The other 99% is spent on traffic tickets, is spent on unarmed, nonviolent disputes. It's spent on substance abuse issues. It's spent on homelessness. And what we're saying is, when we talk about defunding the police, we're saying, hey, let's use money smartly on substance abuse, homelessness, and all of these other issues. And if they're only actually spending 1% of their time on violent crime, let's find a way for them to make that basically their major thing that they do. And let's put everything else and assign that to social workers, to doctors, to nurses, and other civic groups that can handle it without shooting and killing somebody. In some cities right now, nearly 60% of all people who are killed by police are having a mental health crisis. Many people are having either a version of a substance abuse and a mental health crisis. And it's like, listen, we have problems. Los Angeles has problems. I live in New York. New York has problems. They're hard, they're complicated, and traditionally, police showing up to the scene with guns doesn't help any of these problems. I
Yeah.
want us to solve them. I'm just saying the NYPD and the LAPD don't have a quality track record on solving the problems of substance abuse and homelessness. They've been at that stuff for generations, and it's still here. Let's actually tackle our hardest problems, but do it in a way that's bigger than a gun and a badge. And so when we say defund the police, we're saying if cities say that Black Lives Matter, if cities say that children matter, just make your budget say that.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, most city budgets don't show the priorities they say they have. And we're saying we got to reconsider how this works.
Yeah, I think, you used LA as a great example. Like, we're in a city where really no matter what area you're in, the homeless problem is crazy. It's literally
It's a real crisis. And
the whole state, by the way, but like LA, San Francisco specifically, right?
it's a real, and my thing is to say that when you criminalize poverty, which is basically what police do, it's like, okay, you're homeless, we're arresting you.
You have a drug problem, we're arresting you. Yeah.
You can't criminalize substance abuse. You can't criminalize mental health problems. You can't criminalize poverty. We have to actually treat these problems. Here's the thing. These problems are expensive, they're complicated, and they're not easy solutions. What we know is that police are horrible at solving those three problems. And if they knew how to solve those problems, Los Angeles would have nobody who was homeless. Because again, 50% of the general fund in Los Angeles goes to the LAPD.
Crazy.
Yeah, and so it's not what they do, man. Homelessness is I worked at a homeless shelter in Atlanta, and I learned quickly that it is about the intersection of poverty, of mental health, of substance abuse, of poor health, of unemployment. and then you mash all of those things together in one human body, and then have somebody that's homeless for a year or 2 years or 10 years. As I lived in Los Angeles before too, I would meet men and women who have been homeless forever,
Yeah.
but they're struggling with not only deep, deep poverty, they're struggling with mental health problems, they're struggling with substance abuse and addiction. Many of them now have chronic health problems that even deteriorate their body and their mental acuity. Man, policing doesn't solve. Sending those people to jail is cruel and unusual. When they go
It doesn't
there,
make sense. Yeah. Why
they
would you
get,
put someone in jail for using a substance?
but it's not only that. When you send them to jail, they are abused, they are neglected, they are not jails were not built to house people with those challenges and problems.
And the biggest myth is jail. Like it's not. There's no rehabilitation
Oh
that
no, man.
happens.
No. It generally exacerbates your worst problems. And most people, obviously, you see success stories from time to time. But if you go through the Los Angeles jail system, you often come out much worse than you were when you got in. And it chews people up and spits them out. It's an unhealthy environment.
I feel like what you were saying, like if the police, quote unquote, just focused on violent crimes, right? Like, hey, someone broke into my house, or there's a guy with a gun that's trying to get into my front door or whatever. If you know, like you said, it's 1% of what they actually do is probably violent crimes. The rest of it is a bunch of bullshit. Imagine if you actually extended the hiring process, the training process. You know, I feel like that's another part of defunding the police is also just rethinking how do we make someone a cop. They should be the best of us. The best of society should be police officers.
Yeah, they should.
Not the guys who, you know, couldn't get, you know, I feel like a lot of cops, and this is a blanket statement, I guess I won't make it, but I just feel like in general.
No, there are a lot of, man, a
lot of bad people end up becoming cops.
They do. And honest people in the profession. I'm friends with several brilliant, kind, compassionate souls who are currently working on the NYPD. One of my friends named Edwin Raymond is a lieutenant inside the NYPD. He would tell you some of the worst people in all of New York work on that force. They are now he has men and women in there that he reveres and loves, but it attracts a certain brand of asshole, and then you empower that person
with a badge and a gun.
Yeah, to arrest people and give them a badge and a gun. It's a dangerous, you know, quotient of factors coming together. And so the problems in Los Angeles, the problems in California, the problems here in New York, both of our states are super expensive. And these states, our states are complicated in general.
And we pay a lot of taxes.
But most of that is going to things that don't actually solve our problems. Mm-hmm. And what Black Lives Matter in Los Angeles is saying is, no, we want to solve the same problems. We also want to be safe. We just want to go about it in a very different way.
And I also think that it's a perfect example too, where it's not necessarily a partisan problem because we are a democratically ran city and a democratically ran state. And
as top to bottom,
as is New York.
Yep.
And it's, I think, growing up when I was like 18, 19, it's like, just Democrat. It's like, you kind of get, because I grew up in a Democratic household. My grandma loved Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
my mother loved Bill Clinton as well.
It took a long time for me to realize, like, the Clintons are kind of pieces of shit, kind of.
Yeah, they're shady people, man. Yeah,
people.
Shady. Yeah.
But I feel like the same thing. Like, we look at a city like Los Angeles, where Mayor Garcetti is a Democrat. Gavin Newsom, and I think Gavin Newsom's a good dude. Like, I feel like he has good intentions, but like,
he's one of the better governors of all the governors.
I agree. I think he's handled the pandemic well. We've been overly cautious, but I do feel like it's not a partisan thing. It's like at the end of the day, governing is a hard job. But
sure.
I think LA New York City, there's Mayor de Blasio, there's Mayor Garcetti, and there's
And not just that, in New York and California, in New York City and Los Angeles, our city council is completely controlled by Democrats. Yours is too. Our state legislature is completely controlled by Democrats. Yours is too. And so in these states, whatever problems we have, you can't blame Trump. You can't blame Republicans. Like these are our problems. And my thing is, well, let's own them. Let's figure out the hard work that may take the rest of our lifetime. Let's figure out the hard work to solve these problems. But it's on us. And in these states that are completely controlled by Democrats, there are no scapegoats. There are no boogeymen. It's Democrats that control it. And so we have to own these problems.
I wanted to ask you this. In the same way that police brutality has always been around, except for now we have phones that can record it as it happens, right? It's not like this is a new thing. This is something that's always existed. It's just easier to see what's actually happening. I feel like a lot of Trump becoming president emboldened a lot of people who were already racist to just be more outward with their racism.
Yeah.
I would almost argue, though, that started when Obama became president.
Yeah, it's not it's not Obama's fault, but
I just feel like when the black man became president, that's when people started to lose their fucking mind and really show their true colors.
Unequivocally, absolutely. But here's the thing, though. I get that question all the time. People will ask me, Shaun, is police brutality actually worse, or is it just social media and technology? And the answer is, well, both.
Both, yeah.
Every study shows that police brutality actually is worse, and we're now able to film it, document it, share it, tell those stories. But we have more cases of police brutality year over year over year. We have more hate crimes in America now than we did 5 years ago and 10 years ago. So hate is rising, police brutality is rising, and we have the tools to share and talk about it. So it's a bit of a misnomer. And I hear that. I heard Will Smith say something very similar to what you said, Kev, of saying, like, listen, we've always had these problems. That is true. But the problems actually are getting worse. It's not just that we're seeing it more. Every metric and every study I've ever seen shows that these problems are getting substantively worse. And we now have the tools to be able to tell it and share it. So it's kind of both and in that sense, that it does feel like it's getting worse because it is, but it also feels like it's getting worse because we're now inundated with information about it every single day.
Where do you see our country going, Shaun? I know that all the polls are saying that Biden and Kamala. I mean, the poll said Hillary was going to win. Obviously,
yeah.
You never know what kind of tricks Trump has up his sleeve.
They
should. You would hope, but what I wanted to ask is, like, obviously, assuming that they win, the country is extremely divided.
Oh yeah. I don't think that changes at any time soon.
No, not at all. I do feel like a leader like Bernie was someone who could talk to both extremes of the aisle.
Yeah.
Right? And say, hey, look, because at the end of the day, there are people who voted for Trump that voted for him because maybe they felt like they were left out. Not necessarily.
Trump sold to millions of Americans. I don't care what anybody says. Millions of Americans felt millions of white Americans felt abandoned by the Democratic Party. And he came in and said, listen, I love you. And not only do I love you, but I'm going to stand with you. I like you. I want you to rock with me. And it was for the first time for communities of white Americans that often voted Democratic in states like Kentucky, where I was born and raised, and others in Wisconsin, in Michigan. Listen, he appealed to a level of racism and bigotry and misogyny, no questions asked. But Democrats have to own the reality that they abandoned millions of working class people, not just working class whites, but just working class people altogether. And those people have become disaffected. They've become frustrated. And Joe Biden, I think a younger version of Joe Biden tried to engage that community of people in a way. But I don't think Democrats should take for granted that they're going to win. Also, that none of us should take for granted the BS that Trump might pull. I see all day to day
Yeah,
the
with
stuff
the
he's trying to do
mailing
with the
stuff
post
or
office.
trying to postpone the. I mean,
Yeah,
Bill Maher's been saying this for a long time that like he feels like he's not going to leave.
he's a no. He's one of the worst human beings ever elected to office in this country, and that says a lot because
There's been some
many.
shitty human beings that have been elected. KKK members have been elected.
Yeah, and he's up there, man. He's just he's so unethical and so immoral consistently, and that I still to this day am having a hard time imagining him leaving. I'm not seeing it, man.
You posted today that you are taking your Instagram page private. I know that you've obviously had a lot of death threats. Even I think a few of the cops here in Long Beach were
That's right. Yeah,
talking about you
several current and former Long Beach police officers. There was a group of
on Facebook, right?
13 different police officers throughout California had posted death threats inside their private Facebook group. But
why take your IG page private?
oh man, I'm so glad that I did actually. Now there are some drawbacks that I hate. It makes it hard to share what I post, and I'm okay with that. It makes it hard. So if you're not already following me, it makes it very difficult for me to add new people. But every day on my page, thousands of times a day, my page was being spammed with really 3 pieces of content. Like full on spammers who were selling products, who were actually targeting and kind of preying even on some of the people in my community, saying like, do you need us to pay a bill? Follow me and I'll help you. Scammers.
Mm-hmm.
Do you need help with the coronavirus? Follow me. Or people selling cryptocurrency, stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. So spam. Now all of that is gone. I hardly see any of it now that I've made my page private. Secondly, my page was being flooded with people who were there deliberately posting misinformation and lies about me every single day. Well, what we discovered was that the majority of the people who would post that, sometimes with fake accounts, sometimes with accounts that looked real but really weren't, they never followed me. And when you make your page private, they now no longer have access to that. And the third is we saw different white supremacist groups and others frequently planning like, everybody flood this post, flood this thing that Shaun just said with rebuttals and things like that. And just to flood up my page with misinformation. Now that it's private, nobody can do that. Now, the drawback is now it's a closed ecosystem, and I hate that. But at least for the time being, it is virtually spam free. There'll still be some of it, but my estimate is that probably 95 to 96% of it has already disappeared just with a click of a button. Instagram has a real problem with spam, man.
They do. Even like, every time I post something, it's get your page verified or do you need a cartoon drawn?
Oh yeah. The cartoon one is consistent, man. They always get me like
they never go away. Like, how many people design cartoons?
Yeah, yeah. And so man, if you go to my post now, nobody's selling cartoons. Nobody's asking, and it just limited all of it. So whatever algorithms these people are using, they never thought to actually follow people. And so now I've kind of closed the bubble, at least for now. We'll see how it goes.
On the lighthearted side, typically we have a lot of hip hop people on the podcast. I know you're a hip hop guy.
Yeah, man.
What are your like top 3, 4, 5 albums of all time, Shaun King?
Oh man, I would have to. I was a huge Nipsey fan, and I keep Nipsey's last album on. It's literally maybe the only thing that I listen to consistently.
Victory Lap.
Yeah, and so I continue to listen to it. Sometimes the only thing I do to mix it up is like sometimes I'll put it on shuffle, to mix the order of it up. Then I would have to go back, man. I still listen to the stuff that I grew up on. I grew up on Tupac. I grew up on Biggie. I've tried to teach and share some of that with my kids, like the edited versions. but edited old school hip hop, they didn't edit as well.
It was like reversed words. It's like you kind of got what was going on anyway.
Yeah. So the edits aren't nearly as clean. Man, you know, I love the Good Kid, Mad City from Kendrick, and I still think that might be my favorite Kendrick album of all time.
Yeah, I mean, you know what's crazy with that album? Everyone reveres that as like his classic, like his like Illmatic, if you will.
Yeah, in a way, right.
But if you go back and listen to Pimp a Butterfly,
yeah,
that album aged so well with what's going on in the world.
Oh, absolutely. No, it is so relevant for now. And then man, I would have to go back. Man, I have a hilarious story about some West Coast rappers. I'm gonna have to come back on and tell you this story. Okay. But I grew up listening to like West Coast rappers like Sebo, who's up in
Sacramento, Sebo, Brother Lynch, all that. Yep.
Yeah, all of that, brother. I listened to Brother Lynch, all of that stuff, man. And I still go back and listen to some of my old. I feel horrible when I listen to it because there's nothing redemptive.
Especially Brother Lynch.
No, I don't go back and listen to Brother Lynch.
When I was a kid and I heard Brother Lynch, I thought he was really out here doing all that shit. And I was really freaked out.
It was scary, man. It was on something different. Like, when I was a kid, we were told that he was dead, and that because he was dead on the album cover,
right?
And we were all like, there was no social media. Yeah. And so like rumors like that could spread and last for a long time.
And then his friend X-Rated was in jail. Like it was, that's so funny.
No, man.
I never would have taken you as a Brother Lynch guy. Man.
No, man. We loved that, as kids. Now, when Brother Lynch first came out, I was like 14 or 15 years old. Right. And so, man, we were just badass kids, man.
For sure.
And so all of that stuff, I loved E40 and the Click and Sebo and all of that. I wrote a whole chapter about a story I have with Sebo that's not in this book, but it'll have to be in maybe my next book. I got to share it with you one day, man.
That's fair, man. Well, listen, the book Make Change is out. I think you're a national treasure, man, and I appreciate everything you do, and I also appreciate the way you navigate a lot of the negativity that comes your way.
Yeah, thank you, man.
I think there's a lot that could be learned from the way you handle a lot. Hey, did you see the Andrew Schultz thing he did about you?
Oh yeah, man. I hated that because, like guys like Andrew, like I like Andrew, and it's like, why do that? Like I've never had and Andrew and I have several mutual friends, and it's just like, it sometimes it's an outer body experience, man. It's like
almost like being featured on SNL low key, but I do feel like there was just so. There's a thin line between it being comedy and it being like, you're forming, like he forms a lot of people's opinions with those bits he's been doing.
Yeah.
And
it is what it is, man. I see part of it as because I'm so public at this point, it's gonna mean that I'm subject to misinformation, to comedy, to whatever. So I don't take it personally. But I do hate it because it's like, damn, dude, you could have literally reached out to me and gotten better information. But his job is to kind of be a comedic asshole. Like I mean that not even as an insult.
No,
that's kind of his shtick.
100%. That's his shtick.
And his shtick is to push the envelope and to kind of be a hilarious asshole. And he's great at what he does. Yes. It just sucks when you're on the receiving end of it. But I can't, generally speaking, I can't dwell on it for long. I see it, think about it, and I got to keep it moving.
I see you got the Bulls poster behind you.
Oh no, this is that's Boys in the Hood.
Oh, that looks like it's all blurry. That looks like the Chicago Bulls logo.
In fact, I see what you see.
You see what I see? That looks like the Bulls.
That right there, that looks like a Bulls logo right there. You know what that is? This poster is like an original poster.
Okay.
It says it's a weird logo that says "Share the Dream with Coca-Cola."
Oh,
but from right here, I see what you see. It looks like the old Bulls logo, but this is that's Boys in the Hood. Like that's.
I see the font that it could be Boys in the Hood.
Yeah.
Shaun, I appreciate you, man, and keep fighting the good fight. And make sure you go get the book, Make Change, Amazon. Did you the Audible version, you read that like you had
Oh
to
yeah,
record
man.
that
Yeah, the
yourself,
Audible
right?
version is great, man. I narrate it. Bernie's on there. We have 12 different guest voices, including Busta Rhymes. Chuck D is on there.
Wow.
We have 5 original songs that are on there. It's a lot of fun, man. Like I don't think there's ever been an audiobook like
You got
this. Like
Chuck
those.
D and Busta Rhymes on the audiobook?
Yeah, on the audiobook and others, man. We have I think 13 different guest voices that are on there. We have original music that's all about make change. So it's a ton of fun, man.
That's man, amazing. Go support
Yeah.
the book. Go get the. I ordered the book on Amazon, but I feel like now I got to get the audio version.
Get it on Audible, man. No, you'll love it. It's a different. We got it for people who don't normally do audiobooks, So I think you'll enjoy it.
100%, man. Well, look, I appreciate you and keep fighting the good fight. I'll be in
Yeah.
contact with you soon, man. Thanks for checking
Thank you,
in, buddy.
Take care,
Yes,
man.
sir.
Bye now.